Hello, and welcome back to another Team ContiBreak video. So last time we covered the Valence Bruce Final Rush deck, and this time we'll be going through the other Dark States deck, which will be Baromagnes. So it represents Dark Eregs and Pale Moon with its deck mechanics. So as what we did with the first deck overview, we'll be going through its pros and cons, the deck build itself, and deck building options, and its deck matchups. So yeah. So starting off the deck build, we have our Ride deck, which consists of the starter, Uncanny Burning, Deep Sonicer for your grade 1, and Electro Spartan for your grade 2, and Baromagnes for the grade 3. There will be another option for your Ride deck, which we'll be talking about later on. As for now, this will be the Ride deck. We'll also be comparing the other Ride chain later on. So moving on, we have 3 copies of Baromagnes, since Persona Ride is a major or one of the things that will help you close out games, and it also gives you 1 additional soul. Next in your grade 3 lineup will be 4 of Curtis, one of your main soul charging units. It's a soul charge 2, and it with an act skill of CB2 plus 5k to the front row. It will help with reducing hand cards from your opponent. 4 copies of Curtis. Next will be your order, Crawl You Insects with the CB1 order, Soul Charge 1. And it's just a mega buff to one of your units, and it's a draw. You have 10 or more cards in soul, which you probably have. Next will be your main grade 2 unit, which is the Selfish Engraver. So honestly, this is the best grade 2 that Baromagnes can have, since it puts itself into the soul after it attacks, netting you that 1 additional soul. It also counter charges, which helps with costs, and it also has an attack hit skill or ability. So if you're ever down in soul and if that hits, you're gonna get a soul charge, and it also makes your opponent want to guard it. Next will be 3 copies of Electro Spartan, another soul charging unit to get that 15 soul. Next will be a set of Gungram, because it's an on-play skill to soul charge. Its second skill isn't really used that much in its deck, but you can still go for it if you're having a bad game, since it nets you 1 other card in hand. So that was your grade 3 and grade 2 lineup. Forgot to point that out. So this is the start of your grade 1 lineup. So 4 of Gungram, 4 Sentinels of course. It's a staple in every deck. Next will be 3 of Brother Soul. So you can opt to have it at 4 copies or not. So I chose with just going with 3 copies for now. Since there's only 3 in 1 start deck and I don't feel like getting another one, I'll just be waiting for the festival collection to just get my 4th copy. Next will be 2 of Pithana. So this is an indirect soul charge, but you can use its skill for it to go to soul and give a unit +2. Doesn't really help that much, but it's a soul charge. And your last normal unit will be another copy of Deep Sonicer. So it doesn't really do anything in the rear guard besides getting the +10k. So it's a beater. So main purpose for this is just to be called by Baromagnes' 15 soul skill, making it a 28k beater, since you already have 1 in your soul from your Ride deck. So this is just gonna be another beater. So that's it for our main deck. I mean for the normal units is what I meant to say. Next will be our trigger lineup. So one over trigger for Dark States, which should be present in every deck. We'll be running 4 crits, another 4 crits, 3 draws, and 4 heals. So I went with draws for this one since it helps with your discard costs for your ride chain if ever it gets drive checked or damage checked. And it can be used as a rear guard without using that much shield value. So for your deck building options, we'll be having a side-to-side comparison of the 2 ride decks that you can possibly run with a deck. So these are 2 ride decks that you can have, or you have the option for in the Baromagnes deck. So the first one we'll be testing out is this, the normal one. So we'll just be simulating all the soul charges and hand count for this deck. Okay. So when you ride, so we'll just be assuming that we're all going first in this scenario. So when you ride, you'll have 1 soul charge. So that's already 2 cards in soul. Then when you go to grade 2, there's no soul charge there. And then by the time you go to grade 3 with Electro Pardon skill, you'll be putting 1 card from your hand to soul. And then you'll draw a card, and then you'll be soul charging 1. So by the time you get to grade 3, you'll be having 6 cards in your soul. So that's the main advantage for going for the normal ride chain. Next is we'll be testing out the other one, this one, the Diabolos ride chain, though you're not gonna go for Bruce for the grade 3. So by the time you go to grade 1, on ride skill of Steve, you'll be moving this guy to the rear guard circle. Just move this here. You'll be moving this guy to the rear guard circle, and then you'll be soul charging 1. So that's 1 soul. Now when you go to your grade 2 ability, you'll be putting this guy to soul, and then you'll be drawing a card. So you have a +1 in your hand. And by the time you go to grade 3, that's it. So the main comparison that you'll have between the normal ride chain is that by the time you get to grade 3, you have 6 cards in your soul, but you don't have head advantage. As for if you go for the Diabolos ride chain, you'll only have 4 cards in your soul, but you have 1 additional card in hand. So that was the main difference between the 2 ride decks. So you can just choose what you want to go for. But honestly, I'd still go for this, since that additional hand card from the Diabolos one will just mean like an additional card to soul charge. But you already have that with the first one. So yeah, that's the main difference between the 2 ride chains. Now that we have our main deck build, we're gonna go through the pros and cons of this deck. So we're gonna list 5 pros again. So your first advantage will be that Baromagnes 15 soul skill on your first grade 3 ride is actually doable with this deck setup. So that entails that you'll be having 5 attacks, and Baromagnes will have 10 in crit during your first grade 3 turn, which is gonna be big if you're going first and even if you're going second. Your next advantage will be your deck can efficiently manage counterblasts with Selfish Engraver, which is gonna be your main countercharge unit. And the only reason why you're counterblasting is to soul charge, and of course for Baromagnes' on attack ability. Another advantage that this deck has is that you can control and multi-attack. So this is again gonna point out to Baromagnes' skills. So his 15 soul ability is like the main like thing that the build is around. The main thing that the deck is built around. There we go. Yeah, English. So it will reduce all of your opponent's rear guards, putting them to soul. And then you'll be calling 2 from your own soul and they get +10. So that's a multi-attack and buff, and with your other units, especially her, you can just keep spamming her to get that counter charge. You can use a counter blast for Curtis, so that your initial rear guard attacks will have an additional 5k. And one of the good things about your deck is that your 10 skill, 10 soul ability is constantly having crit. So this speeds up your game a bit more. And the last advantage that you have is, because I can't find any more, a good thing aside from what I said is that your Vanguard is dummy thick. So your Vanguard is the thickest out of all the decks in Vanguard, since you're not really soul blasting that much and you'll just be building a tower with your Vanguard. So that's it for your pros, and now moving on to your cons or your disadvantages. Your main disadvantage will be you're very prone to decking out, which will be one of the win conditions for your opponents once they see that you're not really applying that much pressure during the game. So decking out is a big problem with this deck, especially if you can't really push and close out the game. Your next disadvantage is that random soul charges will lose your triggers and Baromagnes, so you can't really persona ride. And if you soul charge, yeah, you're over trigger and the triggers. You don't really have a way of getting them from your soul, so once they're in your soul, they're there. But if you can superior call from him, and that's nice, but you don't really have a way to get them back to hand. Your deck will also be very reliant on your hand cards to pull off your combos, so if you started out with a bad hand full of triggers, a PG, you don't have your soul charging units, the game is gonna go slow, and you won't be able to pull off Baromagnes' 10 soul skill, 15 soul skill, and yeah, that's gonna be a big oof moment for you. The next disadvantage you have is your decisions for your discard for your ride deck and the skill for Electro Spartan as a Vanguard, or when rodden upon by Baromagnes. Your decisions to put cards to soul and the discard for the ride deck will be very difficult, since you'll most likely be discarding your sentinels and your triggers so that you won't lose on cards that soul charge. So that means less guard value from your hand, and that might be a problem later on. And your last disadvantage is that your soul is a public zone. So with all the cards that are in your soul, especially if your opponent checks your soul, they'll see that, oh, this guy has 8 crits in his soul, I can just take the Vanguard since it just has 2 scenarios like that. So they can also gauge out how many triggers you have in hand, so they can just all in on one turn. So yeah, that's one of the things, or those disadvantages that you have. So that's it for our pros and cons. Okay, lastly, we'll be going through your deck matchups. So against Dragon Empire, the Nirvana overdress deck, them retiring your rear guards is not really a problem, except for when they retire this, when you can't put her back into soul. Next will be against Eugene. As what I said before, it's Eugene. He's the one having problems with his deck, not you. Keter, for the Bastion deck, you can board wipe their grade 3s using Baromagnes, so you have an advantage there. Fighting against sorcerers, you're just using your mechanic against using her mechanic. So you're not really disrupting each other with your mechanics, so it's not really a big thing. For Dark States, Final Rush, you have field advantage. And yeah, you can just get rid of his rear guards, make it harder for him to have good rear guards for his Final Rush turns. And yeah. As for a mirror match, the first guy to reach 15 soul will probably win. Now for Story Kea decks, against Magnolia, the multi-attack is still a pain, but you can get rid of it. So that's your advantage. Facing against Zorga, yeah, it's still a mechanic versus mechanic deck matchup, so you're not really disrupting each other. But with Baromagnes' 15 soul ability, you might help with giving him soul, which will be a cost for most of his orders. That's the only disadvantage you have against that. And now for Brantgate matchups. For Prison, you can just get rid of your rear guards by calling her with your 15 soul ability. So you also have advantage there, I think. Now moving on to Orphis. Again, you're not really doing anything to each other with your mechanics. You're just gonna be making him pay 2 counterblasts every turn, so I think the advantage will be going to you. You can just field wipe his Shadow Army tokens. So that's 2 counterblasts from him if he wants to keep putting out the tokens. And you can only have like 4 counterblasts in a game unless you heal. And they have their counter charge. So I think they can keep doing it then. Yeah. So that's it for our deck overview of Baromagnes, Mr. Dark Irregulars over here. Our Dark Irregulars representative over here. And so will be the next deck overviews we'll be having will be for the Stoicheia decks. Magnolia will probably be going first. So yeah, bye.